Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. I have to do this intro for people who watch this back because, of course, the people who watch us live don't join for like 30 seconds or so. And so this is the welcome to the Darkside intro for those people who watch us post live broadcast. Thank you for sticking with us and joining us each week. We are really delighted to have this show. I'm going to take off my glasses because all I can see is reflection. I don't think that's good for any of us, so I might as well just go without them. And for everyone else who's coming on now, welcome to the Dark Side. I'm very excited. Happy Love Day. Happy Love Day, people. It's Love Day. We're all excited. It's Love Day. Right, and you can tell from my husband's face, he is so not plussed by Love Day.
I don't do it.
This is the coming storm, people. The Sim, right there, you told me, date 1, I believe it was. We don't do Love Day. I don't do Love Day. You can do what you want, but I'm just letting you know, I don't do these man-made holidays. If I need to, what was your exact words? If I need to wait till once a year to tell you that I love you, I'm clearly not doing something right. Something like that. I was like, okay, cool. So he sticks to his word. So, happy Love Day, people. We hope that you had a lovely Love Day. Had either one of us realized that we would be here on Love Day, we would have done what today? The dark side of Valentine's. Do you want to give them the dark side of Valentine's? Go on. I know you want to. Did you hear him? He exists. That's his whole dark side. Okay, so we'll do just a quick what's wrong with Valentine's? Come on. Stop being a Grinch. You're loved. You have a woman who loves you, who's amazing, beautiful, caring, educated, intelligent, gorgeous woman who adores you. Like, what? What's the issue?
And you're that thing just one day a year? Okay, cool.
So there you go, dark side of Valentine's. We got there. This idea that you do it once a year. But isn't this, it's not that you do it once a year. People would say this is just like a special way of doing it. No?
Why?
Because it's Love Day. We love Love Day. Do we not love it? Well, let me not use the royal we. I love Love Day. I enjoy telling those I love that I love them on Love Day. I haven't done very much of that because I've been working hard today. But, love you guys.
All right, cool.
I told the one not sick child that we have that I love him and gave him some chocolate. He was very happy. Told him not to eat too much because I think he has a tummy bug too. They've all got tummy bugs in our house. Anyway, so we don't do Love Day. Clearly in our household, I do Love Day. Got everybody a nice little present. They've all got a tummy bug, so they're all in bed. Yuck. So no one got their presents. More chocolates for me. Very exciting. Do you know what I love about Love Day? Can I just say the good side, not the dark side? Discounted chocolate the next day. Love sales. I love a good sale on good quality chocolates. It's lovely. Okay, so now that we've gotten over my excitement about the Love Day, he is completely disengaged from our topic because I'm still talking about the Love Day. Shall we move on to something that is not Love Day related? Well, no, actually it is Love Day related. Come on, Love Day started with like St. Valentine, isn't
it? Okay.
Didn't the church give us this glorious holiday of chocolates and roses and no? Wow, look at the face. Oh my gosh, look at the face.
Listen, if memory serves me correct, the story of St. Valentine is something to do, and the reason why hearts are given is because his heart was cut out and all sorts of stuff. So if you really want to go into the history of it that I can recall, yeah, we can do that.
All right. Okay. All right. We'll just move on to today's topic then, shall we? So everyone who watches this will know that they're watching Pastor Purple and The Coming Storm, and I work as a pastor, and so we are both Christians. We follow a particular Christian denomination, tradition, which I work for. And what you may not know, or what you may have encountered once or twice, is me apologizing for being a Christian. Not apologizing for being a Christian, apologizing for being associated with other Christians. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. So sometimes when people meet me, I normally say, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, oh, because you were having a great conversation right up until you said, so I'm a pastor. And then they say, oh, you seem so nice, is generally the response. And I say, yeah, I'm really sorry for those people who are associated with Christianity who do not give the best representation of Christ, if we should put it like that. And we then spent some time laughing and unpacking the difference between a Christian and a Christian. Always fun. And so we were having a discussion this week, really fantastic discussion, because it was actually very sad, to be fair. There was another story of a very famous apologist who died a year ago, and 6 months ago, in fact. And after his death, more stories came to light. They came to light before, but more stories came to light of his sexual abuse of women, and it's so much so that the organization that he founded did an investigation. And normally the Common Storm and I would say that that's not a great idea, because what will happen is they'll brush it under the carpet and they'll walk away. Even if the person is deaf, they will go to their graves covering it up. And in this case, pleasantly surprised to say, they did a full investigation, it seems. They released the findings in full, or somewhat full. It's a very large document, against the family. So the family don't want all of this information out there. And it basically has led to them completely stepping down operations, etc. And there is some discussion within the Christian community about, we can't give them props for this. They should have done more when he was alive, blah, 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 blah. And there is an extensive piece written in the document that talks about the fact that, when you're almost starstruck, when you're fighting for your cause, when you're in your corner doing your thing, sometimes you don't do the right thing. And this is them acknowledging that they haven't done the right thing, that they believe every single woman that has come forward, that they believe all the stories, that they want to do what is right by these women. They want to serve restitution, etc., etc. And, a lot of people are like, too late, too late, too late. Christians have already had their chance at this and you guys are rubbish. But at the same time, I kind of feel like, yeah, okay, absolutely. Yes. We could always do better. But can we just sit in the surprise moment that they did the right thing now? Because this is unusual. This is not a normal situation, it feels like. I would like to think this is normal, but sadly it isn't. And so we got into a discussion about the dark side of Christianity and how actually, yeah, we have been on the back foot of everything, it seems, as Christians. I don't know how you would describe it, Jeremy, but it seems like any issue in the world today, you can almost run a line from it to Christianity. That's how I feel most days.
Okay.
And we're normally on the wrong side of it.
Less of the government names, yeah?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. All right. Jeez, man. Calm down. All right. Come on. But yeah, so I don't know how you feel about it, Mr. Storm. Yeah.
What, about this particular case that you're speaking of? Yeah, you can always do better. I think they should have done better. However, I'm not giving them props for not doing what they should have done. But I think they do deserve some recognition for their willingness to do what seems to be anathema to Christian organizations, and that is to acknowledge their wrongs, apologize for their wrongs, and seek to make restitution for their wrongs. And so, although I'm not giving them credit for doing the right thing, well, listen, as a Christian, why do you want credit for doing the right thing? That should be what you do.
Do the right thing. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think you need to recognize what they've done, and I think there's a difference between the two.
Yeah, I think there's two things for me. One is that, of course, I'm harder on my own than I am on others. So, of course, being a Christian, I take these things very personally to a certain degree, because you tarnish my work and my name when you do things like this. So it feels like every time I say something, people will have these associations in their mind. And of course, I have nothing to do with any of this. I've not worked with the organization. I know nothing about it. So I had to do a bit of research myself to figure it out. And the other part of it is actually, this is normal human behavior. Like, I'd like to say, in some ways, it's only Christians that do this badly. But, you know, we live in different countries, and those countries don't have a monopoly on doing the wrong thing when it comes to sexual predatory behavior. When that is, you know, we could talk about case after case after case that has nothing to do with the church, and it's covered up, blah, blah, blah. And I don't say that as an excuse at all. I'm saying there's a context, I think. And that I do hold Christian, you should not be like that. That should be the standard. If this is what everyone else is doing when it comes to this issue, they're covering it up, they're protecting the perpetrator, they're reoffending to the victim, they're, you know, the abuse just continues and magnifies and gets worse, then the very least you should do as a Christian is be the opposite of that. That should be that you should just pick that position up and go, what's the 180 from that? And let's go with that option. And sadly, I think what happens is they follow exactly the same pattern. And I find that just deplorable, because we should be the champion of the vulnerable, of the weak, of the widow, of the poor, of anyone who's in these positions. Not to say that, of course, all the women are poor or widows, but the point being they're vulnerable. You know, they have been abused, and we should be their champions. And instead, there is this idea of perpetuating the problem. So that got us into some good discussions this week about the difficulty of being a Christian in the 21st century, the difficulty of being associated with a religion that has its name tarnished in a multitude of ways. This being one area, of course. So, you know, sexual ethics being one area. And another area, of course, is Trump and the right extremist, it's not right, it's extremist hijacking of your faith. I don't believe that this is right wing. It's just extremists, extreme white people in actual a lot of cases, extreme white people who believe that God is on their side when they are attacking government buildings to overthrow the government and an election, when they are pouring out hate on Black Lives Matter, when they are pouring out hate on Mexicans, when they're pouring out hate on immigrants, when they're pouring out hate on locking up people in cages. I mean, the list is endless of things that it seems that extreme white Christians have said. And they're not all Christians. There are just extreme people in that category. But Christianity is held up. We all remember the scenes during the Black Lives Matter march this summer when Trump wanted to stand outside of a church with a Bible in his hand. I'm sure he's never read or seen before until the day they put it in his hand. But I shouldn't cast aspersions or judgment. And he did some atrocious things in the name of that protest and ended up standing out there. So just in the last year, we can recount a lot of things that Christians are associated with that we would really rather they weren't. I would really rather they just were not. I'd really rather they bore the name of Christ, which led us to then think, well, what's happening? What's going on? What's the problem? Not to mention the fact that we have all sorts of movements who are having this crisis identity because we believe in Jesus. So we believe the Bible is a unified story, to quote one of my favorite theological schools. We believe the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus. And Jesus is that fulfillment of the story. And Jesus in the 4 Gospels is explained as a justice warrior in some ways, as a champion of the poor, as somebody who came and taught us what it meant to give his life and what it meant to dedicate yourself to God and that relationship and be about others. And then when you turn back to Christianity, you go, oh, and then there's this. And so there's a lot of people who kind of said, well, how do we get back to that biblical narrative, and how are abandoning the mainstream Christian denominations and are turning to things like the Black Israelites and Messianic movements, and are just trying to find their way back to Jesus in some ways, away from Eurocentric ideas of Christianity. So there is this movement of decolonializing Christianity because the history of Christianity is not very good. There is some stuff that happened that really we're not happy with, and how far back does that go, and where do we have to begin undoing that? And so I guess, I mean, I live with this. This is something I live with on an everyday basis in my job. It doesn't escape me ever that this is a real 21st century problem. How do you promote, live with, how do you live Jesus in the 21st century when other people claiming his name are undermining, this is my words, undermining your very actions, like literally undermining you? How do you live with that? And how do you restore people's faith in the faith when, you know, they've been so badly burnt and hurt by the racists, by the going to war, by the criminalization of others, by the exclusion of women, by the exclusion of anybody that's not blonde and blue-eyed, you know, like what, you know, if you don't conform to this, what do you do? And I think that's where we find our discussion today. So you're going to help me to unpack this, and I'm going to try not to put my foot in my mouth. This is basically how that's going to go, right?
Mm.
We said, all right. So where do we begin unpacking this mess? Because I think, you know,
I find that the beginning is always the best place to start.
Okay.
I mean, you might want to start somewhere else. It's your show, so we'll go for it.
It's ours. Look, see, says Pastor Purple and TC Storm. It's our show. And yeah, so we're going to go back to the beginning. So the beginning is 2,000 some odd years ago. And we're going back to the roots of Judaism. That's what you're saying. So going back to the Jewish roots, going back to what it was then.
I'm going to go back to the foundation of the Christian church, because I think it's necessary. One of the biggest accusations against the Christian church is one of its history of violence.
Yes.
So typically the Crusades will be quoted, you know,
always
about the evil of Christianity, and the Crusades were evil. Let's not beat about the bush here. The Crusades were evil, but by the time we arrive at the era of the Crusades, what we are dealing with is a corrupted and bastardized version of Christianity.
Okay.
Because the early Christians, at their heart, were pacifists.
Right.
They did not believe in wars. They did not believe in violence. And so they were opposed to conquest. They were opposed to the Roman armies. They were opposed to all of these things. You know, so to the earliest Christians, you know, the idea of the Crusades would have been sacrilegious, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
You know, it would have gone against pretty much everything they stood for.
Yeah. I mean, it goes pretty much against everything I stand for now, so I can only empathize with that feeling, you know. And I think it's interesting because I kind of want to know, so if in the earliest conceptions of Christianity in these house groups, because that's what we're talking about, so Christianity spread into house groups, they would go to worship at the synagogue, or, you know, they would go to along with all the other Jewish people. This is a branch of the Jewish faith. This is its fulfillment according to the rest of our scriptures. How do we get from a network of house groups who were pacifists, who we know they set up deacons straight off the bat to feed widows, so we knew they were doing that. We know that they had systems of equality and egalitarianism where, you know, the rich wealthy business owner would be worshipping in a house group with, you know, your local fisherman or what have you. So they, you know, whoever was in your local vicinity, and that these meals that they would have would cross these generations, cross these aisles of separation, of divide. How do we get from that concept, that birth, to, I mean, the complete, like, 180, complete opposite of what it is that they're doing? How do you get there?
Well, what you have is secular ideas start to influence Christian thinking and thinking within the church. So the ideas of Plato, you know, of the Greeks, Cicero, of the Romans, start to enter the church with this concept of a just war.
Okay.
So under some circumstances, war would be justified.
Okay.
And so you have that notion start to take hold within Christianity, and then you start to see a move away from a complete position against war, armies, violence, to one where, well, it's justified in some cases.
Right.
And what happens is that once Christianity now becomes the dominant power, becomes the religion of the Roman Empire, and it becomes a dominant power, that by the time of Pope Urban II, he issues a decree called Bellum Sacrum. And that is in the 11th century. And that is where we get the notion of what he's now calling a holy war.
Right.
Right. So we've now moved away from a justified war to a holy war, in which you can be purified by going and fighting for these causes. You know, your salvation can be assured for dying for these causes. And it's a complete move away from early Christianity.
And I think, just to pause for a minute, because some people would say, okay, but there are wars in the Bible. But there is nothing like this position in the scripture, right? There is no war or no fights or no conflict in the Bible in which you could possibly stretch to. Yes, if you go and start a war with somebody else and cleanse them, or whatever you want to call it, from their heathen, pagan, whatever you're labeling it, ways, that you would become saved as a result. I mean, there isn't any, like, it's just such a corruption of the narrative.
It is a corruption. It's a massive corruption. But also, I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that you cannot separate violence within the church from power within the church.
Right. Okay.
And with the Christian church becoming the real seat of power within Rome and the Roman Empire, you just start to see then violence becomes necessary, but you see a move away from what the actual Christian church was meant to be.
Mm.
You know, it was never meant to be a kingdom founded on might. It was meant to
Right.
be a kingdom founded on service,
Right.
which is why the early Christians were opposed to war, or one of the
Right.
reasons why they were so opposed to war and violence.
Right.
There's other things that they disagree with, or other reasons. There were two school of thoughts in it, and now there's a third one for why they were opposed. One is, yes, religious reasons, beliefs against the use of violence, and the other one is that they opposed the Roman religions, the Roman gods that were so prevalent within the Roman army. And then there's the later school of thought is that actually it's a mixture of the two.
Right.
Which is something I describe to, because I don't think it's as simple cut as we just don't believe in violence, so we're not doing it. I think there is evidence for that it's actually a mixture of the two. They were opposed to the Roman gods and practices and culture.
Right. And I mean, I wonder, because I think it feels like such a slap in the face of the story of Jesus, where you have in the Bible all of these kind of stories of big empires going to war, winning by overthrowing, even the Hebrew people doing the same thing, arguably in some cases, by war and slaughter and etc. And it seems that when Jesus comes, he's confronted with that very idea. You know, the people are occupied, the people are, you know, and everyone wants him to go out and do this. And he says, no, that's not the way. The way is not to win this by killing. The way to win this is in service. And of course, he gives his life to it. So it feels like such a contradiction to how Jesus lived.
Well, I think we need to recognize here that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Because here's the irony of the whole situation. Christianity became the dominant force in the Roman Empire through service, through sacrifice, not power and might. So you have to ask yourself, had the Roman Empire changed its ethos and continued to do things through sacrifice, through working goods, for all of these things, what could Christianity have accomplished without the need for force? Right?
It's a really painful, it feels like to me that that's the critical turning point, is the mixing of power and religion, as you say, that idea that you have a state religion and that is your drive, that's now become your reason to go and commit these, is because, okay, we have got the right religion, so of course here we go, we're going out and we commit the atrocities because we want you to be like us. But when we were like us, we were doing the nice things. We were caring for the widows and the sick, and we were staying behind, and we were giving, and but now we're not like that anymore. In fact, we are now becoming like you, supposedly, or like the other, or like.
I think that's absolutely what happened. And what also happened was there was a failure of people to recognize. See, as a Christian, you were meant to be a citizen within the kingdom of God.
Right. So kingdom is a big idea in the Bible.
Right. So, but what we're dealing with now is you being a citizen of the Roman Empire.
Okay.
So it's not now that you're a Christian and now a citizen of God. You're now a citizen of this Roman Empire, a citizen of this empire or this nation. And one of the key tenets to becoming a citizen of the kingdom of God is that you have to choose to be a citizen of the kingdom.
Yes.
Which is something that, you know, I want to talk about in regards to this concept of power and empire. It's the fact that actually that ability was stripped away from many, many people.
Right.
And it was done in the name of Christianity. But you could never force someone to be a Christian.
No. Because Christianity, the fundamental of our book is saying that people have freedom of choice, and that's how we end up where we are, is free will, not something we like to discuss, but free will. And if you are going to be a Christian, you definitely have to pick it. Like, you can't just be like, I woke up and somebody bashed me in my head and now I'm a Christian. Like, I have to pick Jesus. I have to choose. There's this, turning away from my old life, or turning away from who I worshiped before, and moving towards God. Okay, go on.
I think this becomes problematic, deeply problematic for Christianity and Christians, when you recognize that some of the early patristic fathers are actually advocating for this sort of idea of forcing people to convert. So you have Augustinian in his epistle 185, who's arguing for the conversion or the forced conversion of people. You have the Inquisition. You've got colonialization, and how they interacted with indigenous peoples, where they would just go in and they'd rename people. They just come along and be like, yeah, let's see, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and they just give these people names that were alien to them, and then they would tear down everything from their culture, from the religions, from the belief systems. It goes as deep as their family systems. You can only have one wife. Well, what about the other wives that they had when you got there? You're just throwing them out on the street. And so that whole ability of people to choose is lost when the church becomes empire and it gains power. And I think it actually loses the true meaning of Christianity. And so I struggle. The problem is the Roman Catholic Church, Christianity, and empire are so interwoven up until about 150, 200 years ago that it becomes hard to separate the two. In fact, no, you probably go back a bit further, because you start to have the Anglican Church. But that still brings with
that's a state religion
of empire and power and all the rest of it.
It's a state religion. Like, it was literally created for an extra wife. Yeah,
it was created so Henry VIII could get a divorce.
Yeah, I want to do what I want to do. You won't let me? We got your beliefs already. We can just write our name on them and make them ours. So I guess, let me just try and put this in my layman's terms to make sure, I really get this, because I think it's important to understand that, the kind of problems that we're dealing with in the 21st century, when we say, let's decolonialize, let's look at unpacking our faith and stripping back some of those things. Some things struck me about what you were saying. So a huge turning point, landmark, is kind of the mixing of the Christian faith with political power, with the will to become and not lose political power also. So not only did you gain power, but that idea that losing power now became a tenant. We don't want to come out of power, so you've got to convert to us, and we're going to do that by force. We're going to do that by might.
I would say that it's not the gaining of power that's so much the issue, it's the fear of loss.
Yeah, right. So that's what I was trying to emphasize on. It's not that, we got power. Okay, that's one thing. But now we're afraid to lose the power. Now we want to make sure we maintain our power status. Now we want to make sure we keep our power status. And we're not going to do it in the ways that make sense to our faith, which would be, okay, if we take care of the least amongst us, then of course we're going to keep power, because people will like us. They will be happy with their life. They would, we're feeding people, everyone's getting a fair wage, things are going well for people, they've got hospitals or something, there's family structures, you've got local communities, by all accounts, there were lots happening in those early house churches where people were getting opportunities and they were feeding and they were sharing wealth and so on and so forth, which would actually keep your power a lot longer. instead, we're going to be afraid of losing our power and do this by force and forcing conversions. What I find interesting, particularly for English speakers, and I myself, when you said it just now, I smiled because you said, when we go through the colonial era now of this power structure, people would strip indigenous peoples of their names, and they would just be like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, da 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 da. And of course, what struck me when you said that is those aren't even biblical names.
They're real names. They're not the real names. Yeah.
Real names. So they're anglicized names, particularly, and other countries have adopted some. Lots of other European countries have adopted anglicized or Europeanized versions of these names. Very few have returned the people's names to them. So you've anglicized the book, like the book itself has been changed, like the names are changed, the names of places are changed. Because
listen, the Jews believed there is power in naming people.
Right. And it's powerful. Like it's a really thing.
When you strip the original names away from these people, you strip the power of their identity away from them. And once again, this comes back into the whole notion of colonialization, white supremacy, all the rest of it comes back into this. But what you're doing is you're stripping the power of their identity away from them. And that was necessary, or viewed as necessary, for many reasons. But anyway, yes, let me know.
So it's quite interesting because I see like a mirroring. So they're doing it not only to the indigenous peoples where they're going, but they've already done that in another step. So there's been a step before you even do that to others, is that you've done it to the very people that you're holding up as your following. So you say you're following Jesus. This is who you say you're following, but you've anglicized his name. You've anglicized everybody else's name in the book. You've stripped them of their cultural identity, the cultural markers. You're not following those people, you're following your version of them. And then you've turned around and applied that to everybody else. So there's like this whole step that goes with that.
And this is one of the biggest criticisms and failings and flaws in Christianity, and I think it's perhaps a human problem. I wouldn't just limit it to Christianity. I would say it's to do with any religion, but Christianity, because of its beliefs, this is a particular issue with, and it comes across as hypocritical, because what we've done is, as Christians, we proclaim we are made in the image of God, and yet we spend all our time trying to make God in our image. So when we strip away their names, it's because we're trying to make people like us. When we strip away their identities and their cultures, it's because we're trying to make people like us. And it becomes problematic, especially when you start later on throughout the centuries to do a slave trade and empire and colonialization in countries which aren't white, to have a God who is not white.
Yes, that would be problematic, of course. So we get the birth of the blonde, blue-eyed Jesus, a very famous painting, to accompany said journeys into indigenous lands, or is that even the right way of saying it? What would we say? I mean, into non-European countries, basically, because everybody outside of you're indigenous on your own land, right? I don't know. It seems weird. I'm just having a moment. Okay, back. Focus, Tabitha. Focus. Right, okay. So there is this clear mixing of power, which leads to some of these really huge problems of mixing state and religion. So I have a question that I want to kind of pause on for a moment, because this is an ethical question that I've heard students deal with, I've heard politicians deal with, I've heard whole parties deal with. And this one is of, well, then, if we know that power is a human problem, like power is a human problem, it says the love of money, but I think it could have just said the love of power, and we'd all be as understanding. When it comes to power,
money, power, respect.
There you go. It can be an aphrodisiac for people, and they will do anything to keep it. The fear of losing it can drive and motivate people to do wicked things, because it's not just Christians who've suffered with this. Lots of history to say everybody is having the same problem, but we're talking about Christianity right now. So if we know that, if we then look in our own faith and see, okay, so the big turning point for Christianity, moving away from the small networks, moving away from local initiatives, doing good in their communities, going out to the next community, doing good conversions, so on and so on and so forth, through the good works that we do, through the good actions, through the lived experience of people, to nation and power, and we're going to just force everyone to be a Christian. Should I, in the 21st century, who's studying politics and who wants to make a difference in the world and knows that everything in the 21st century around the world runs through a political system, if I want to wipe my nose, there's tissue involved and somebody made a rule about it, there's a law about it, so I got to work out the political system. Should I, as a Christian, enter politics? Should I be entertaining these conversations in a real way? Because if power is an issue, political power is political power. Like, should I be doing that?
Once again, there's nothing wrong with political power. The problem is, how far will you go in your fear of losing that power that you will compromise your actual beliefs? And that is the problem of the Christian church and the Roman Empire. Right.
Okay. And I think then that makes it really clear, because I've had to have these conversations with students who have aspirations to political political power, in terms of they want to run for an office, they want to make a difference in their local communities, they want to make a difference in their home countries, and they're studying politics in order to help to move their countries forward, or to move, the needle on different political issues. And one of the questions that they will often ask me as a pastor is, well, isn't that the wrong thing? Shouldn't I not be involved in politics? And my answer is always, yes, you should, absolutely. You just have to remember your faith. Like, this is why you're doing what you're doing. And keep that guiding light, and keep grounded with people so that you don't lose your mind to the power. You got to keep focused on what you came to do, and not like, what if I lose? If you lose, you lose. Like, let's not be selling out our soul in order to win. We're not here to win that. We're here to do this. And I think that's been my answer. I feel kind of comfortable now. I feel like that's helped. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, systems of government have always existed in different forms. And even when we look back throughout the scripture and the beginning, we go back to the Old Testament. The nation of Israel was a theocracy. That in itself was a system of government. The priesthood had a certain amount of power and responsibility within the society. Then you had the judges when they, had that. And then they become a kingdom. And then it just all
fell to pieces. But I guess in some ways, in the theocracy of the Bible, they always had gatekeepers. So we always had the prophets. Yeah. And so there was always this force of gatekeeping that would happen, that would cry out against the rotten king, against the evil power of their own. So I think that's challenging. That's a challenge.
Yeah. And I think that one of the problems has been that the idea of a prophet has really moved, or what the core function of a prophet has really changed over time. Dr. O'Rourke,
he would say, Dr. O'Rourke.
he would say, that prophecy is about forthtelling more than foretelling.
I always say it's a truth teller. You had to always remember that your prophet's basic function is truth telling. If the prophet doesn't tell the truth, they are not a prophet. Doesn't matter what else they say. If they don't tell the truth, you are not a prophet. And that, for me has always been the linchpin. When I look at the Hebrew tradition of what was a prophet, my great one is Nathan and David. So for those of you that don't know the biblical story, Nathan and David is a real turning point for the kingdom of David. When David is king, he was great until he wasn't. Power is just, it corrupts, bless. And he took a man's wife, he took a man's life, and he hid it all. He tried to cover it all up. Did the worst that you could do to somebody and covered it all up. And then Nathan has to go stand before the king and tell him what he's done. That's what God says. And we think of prophet as telling the future, where Nathan is just telling him what he did. He's just telling the truth. This what you did. I'm holding the mirror up to you. This your mess. This what you did. This what you look like right now. I'm going to tell you a nice story, and when you get upset, I'm going to tell you it's you, and I'm going to hold the mirror up to you. And I think that for me is when we talk about those kind of gatekeepers of the Bible, it's the prophets, it's the truth tellers, it's the ones who stand against power and says, hey, look at yourself. You don't look great right now because you're doing the wrong thing. This is wicked. This is evil. And okay, prophets are not a great job, because if you tell the truth to somebody who has power, I mean, they tried to kill like Jeremiah, was it 3 times or something? They buried him at one point. I mean, poor man. I mean, he suffered. Like, he really suffered. It's not great.
Yeah.
So, it's not a great job. I wouldn't want it.
It's not. But just to reinforce the point about prophets is that, the Bible's very clear. Nobody knows the future.
Right.
Nobody but God knows the future. And so I say this because we take into account the story of Jonah and Nineveh.
Okay. Oh,
The city shall be destroyed. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the 40 days, the city isn't destroyed. So how was Jonah still a prophet? Because he told the truth. He went and spoke to the people and the king of Nineveh and told them the truth about themselves. And Jonah remains a prophet because the greatest importance is not on the foretelling, but the forthtelling.
Yep, tell the truth.
Nobody knows the future apart from God.
Yeah.
And so you can still maintain the status as a prophet if you're carrying out your primary function.
Telling the truth. Tell the truth and shame the devil. That's what we say in the 21st century, right? Tell the truth and shame the devil. Okay, so this is interesting. All right, so we've deviated somewhat from the darkness of Christianity into some nicer bits of theology, which is nice. Whew. Well, just put that down for a moment. I enjoyed that bit.
In some ways, the segue into the Old Testament and the talking about the prophets and stuff is interesting because it brings up another problem within Christianity.
Okay.
And that is that there is this anti-Jewishness that flows historically throughout Christianity, and not just historically, it flows into modern day.
Right. Okay. And this is a particularly painful one, of course, because we've just talked about the Hebrew Bible and the Hebrew people, and we've talked about the Jewish faith, and we've done that very easily with great, I hope they would feel a great deal of respect, because we have a great deal of reverence for our whole Bible and for our whole faith. But that's not the case for most people, it seems. Like, that interaction is very limited, to the point that, there are Jewish people today who are more weary of Christians than they are of like regular average citizens, because they feel like Christians are anti-Jewish, which seems odd because their Bible is majority Jewish and the entire thing is written like, so okay, the first part is the Jewish Bible, so what we call the Old Testament is their Jewish scriptures, their Holy Torah. But the rest of it is written by Jewish people and characters, and all of them are Jewish. So it seems very odd that you would have this association of anti-Jewishness with a faith that is entirely based on Jewish people and scriptures.
Okay, so let's take there's whole historical reasons for why there's that movement. What I want to say is that, once again, with the idea of violence and how the church the idea of violence becomes acceptable within the church.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of being anti-Jewish did not exist amongst the first Christians. They were still worshiping in synagogues. They would go to synagogues. They would worship with the Jews. They were known as keepers of the way. Right. So this whole distinction into Christian and Jew
as a separate thing. Yep.
It's a separate thing. And it occurs, I think the word Christian is like used twice in the Bible.
Yeah, there's the scripture in Acts which says this is the first time that the people are known. The people of the way are known as Christians. Ironically, it's a nice little sentence. So you would miss it if you don't know it's there, but there is a reference to the fact that, of course, these are just almost like how we think of denominations today. It's a denomination within Jewish faith. These are the way people. these are the other people, and these are the other people, and these particular people follow the way. Yeah. So there's that one, and then I think there's a couple of references throughout Paul. Something.
Yeah, as I said, it's not very often that the word Christian is used, and so there's this real. There still exists a sense of community amongst the early Christians and the Jews, and then there become historical reasons. Rome starts persecuting Jews, so that then the Christians want to start to separate themselves from the Jews to avoid persecution, which is one of the reasons. Another reason, I can't remember the exact cause as to why, but there was something within some of the synagogues in Jerusalem, and then the keepers of the way were expelled from the synagogues. They were told you can't worship there anymore. And so, you start to see the divisions amongst the people for reasons. I was trying to find the reason. It's in one of the books that I have here, and I couldn't find the source for it today.
One day we'll do a pan around the room. Pick a book. Which one?
Yeah.
Too many.
So you start to see those reasons develop. And then
and this is an interesting one because a lot of people would as soon as you said, and then the Christians separated themselves from the Jewish people to avoid persecution, I just kind of held my head down in shame, because you just think, you can't, what were you thinking? This is awful. And at the same time, I recognize self-preservation is like a thing, that's a human thing. Okay, we're gonna die like that. No, we're not going to die like that. We're going to do this and distinguish ourselves to make sure we don't die. But this idea of self-preservation turning into something quite, it's turned into something quite nasty.
Yes, it has. And as I said, there was a whole bunch of propaganda that accompanies this, and once again, it's to do with part of the reason, when the Christian empire marries the Christian church marries to the Empire of Rome, and all of these things that come along with it. The Jews killed Jesus, etc., 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 etc. Well, actually, no. To be honest, it was everybody that killed him. Jews weren't alone in this, The Roman Empire were not Jewish, right? And so there's a real dishonesty that goes with it. And I think also what you see established is that people tend to use, a lot of Christian denominations tend to use Jewish scripture, in other words, the Torah and the prophets and everything, a lot less. Right? So they won't use it much. They'll concentrate heavily on the Gospels and ignore, for a large part, the value of the Old Testament. So when you will go to hotels, and things like that, you'd find the Gospels in your nightstand
the Gideon
table,
Bible,
the Gideon Bibles, but that will be the Gospels.
Well, I mean, I was listening to a Christian the other day, and it's even worse than that, because actually a lot of times They focus on the letters. So they even kind of move beyond. They have this narrow scope of, okay, we'll take a gospel, just one of them, whichever one serves our purpose, generally Mark, and then we'll spend the rest of our times in the letters, and we won't reach Revelation. That's too far. That's gone a bit too far. So there's this real narrow scope within which you're working, and if you do that, you actually lose all the context of all of those scriptures, because all of that relies very heavily on the Old Testament. So it all means something completely. When you read it in the light of the Old Testament, it means something completely different to what you were suggesting in the first place. So I think that's a challenge. But anyway, I'll let you get back to your thoughts. Sorry.
And I think, Christianity has lost a lot of its value, and its worth in today's society, because it's ignored the Old Testament. It's largely ignored the Old Testament. And so you have a misrepresentation and a misunderstanding in lots of areas of it. And as I said, I put this down to an idea of anti-Jewishness that has been in the Christian church for centuries.
Yeah. And led to some horrendous atrocities, I mean, in recent history. So there are times when it's cost people their lives. As much as there have been Christians who've helped, say in World War II, there were Christians that literally sold Jewish people out and were the propagators. You had those, both faces were seen. There will be Jewish people who encountered Christians who were Christians and who followed the way, and who hid and who tried and who stood against. And then you have a whole portion who sold them out and did the evil things. So there is that double face constantly. And I can understand if I'm sitting in the seat of the person whose faith you're decimating, that it would feel like a slap in the face. Not only are you trying to kill me, but you're doing it with my book and my people.
Yes.
What's that? That's terrible.
And one of the issues is, and as I said, I mean, I'm happy if there's any to have this discussion with if there's any Jewish people out there that want to have the discussion with me, that there's a distinction to be made between being anti-Jewish and anti-Semitism.
Okay.
In regards to the fact that you can be secular and Jewish.
Okay.
And actually the faith itself. And I think what has happened is that what began as being anti-Jewish has largely morphed into anti-Semitism.
Right.
But I don't think that they were necessarily one and the same thing.
But then you've got this kind of full circle now. So it seems to me as if there are two strains of full circle. So you have the face of if you want to put it, anti-Jewishness into anti-Semitism, which has, as I say, led to some really awful atrocities. But then there now seems to be this idea that, oh, look, the Bible is like a Jewish book. Oh my goodness, what should we do? We read that this was like a thing. And then you have this kind of almost Zionist movement, should I say it like that? Jews must be returned to their home. We must protect them at all costs. There are Christians in this movement that are like, you've got to put the holy people back on the holy land and do that.
Right. Now, I just want to interject here because I think it's important to say that even at the heart of evangelical Christians' desire to protect Israel and to have the Jews in Israel is anti-Semitism, not anti-Jewishness, anti-Semitism.
I feel like that's going to be a longer discussion because I just went, what? What'd you say?
What you have to understand is the reality is they just don't want the Jews amongst them.
Right. So this goes to it. This is an American conversation. What you're talking about. So this is
no. This is a European problem.
A European conversation.
When you start to look at the creation of Israel, the state after the Second World War,
right,
and you start to look at Churchill and his statements and comments on it, and a lot of the other European leaders,
Right.
they did not like the Jews. They wanted the Jews over there, away from
Right.
us, not in our countries. And
But they
so at
used
the
it under the
heart,
guise of safety and land and religion, and
right,
so they used that. They dressed it up in that language. Okay, all
right.
right.
So
I
at
see what
the
you mean now.
heart,
I understand. Okay.
right. So at the heart of evangelical Christianity, the desire for an Israeli state,
Hmm.
which I'm not opposed to,
Hmm.
is actually anti-Semitism.
Right, because
Now that
in those times you would see the imagery, and to this day, I mean, literally just in the American Senate just not too long ago, a woman was from I've forgotten her name already. Thank the Lord, it's gone out of my head. But she was propagating ideas of um, Jewish spy satellites from I don't know where, doing I don't know what to who. Bless her. So these ideas of power and money and
Marjorie Taylor Greene, that's the name you're looking for.
oh, that's the name I was hoping to forget. Yes, thank you, that one.
Yes.
Those ideas that she was propagating while still trying to maintain some kind of evangelical belief. And I think I should probably do some justice here to the evangelical church in the UK and say the Evangelical Alliance of the UK would like to disassociate themselves from the evangelical movement. There's two separate things. So they have toyed with the ideas, but there are different branches that use the word evangelical. They're not all the same. So we're talking evangelical in the broadest sense of the word, which we understand American kind of terminology.
Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when I say evangelicals, right? And the anti-Semitism, because she believes that the Israeli state should exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She's a Christian evangelical. Listen, that's the label she gives herself. Right?
Okay, can we preface it by saying that's the label she gives herself? Because when you say Christian, I feel the need to apologize and say I'm really sorry, everybody.
Feel better. Whatever makes
not
you feel
like
better.
Me. I'm a Christian, but not like her.
She's a Christian evangelical who believes the state of Israel should exist, but at the same time is putting out these ideas that the world is run by a Jewish cabal, the Rothschilds, and that they're firing down lasers from space. That's deeply rooted in anti-Semitism.
Oh, bless her. Bless her.
So she is a perfect example of what I'm saying, about, evangelical Christians.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, I gotcha. Okay, cool. All right, so there's this idea then. So there's another big thing. So we've gone from power and we've now moved to power again, because it is really about power, isn't it? The idea of how you control your religion, how you you strip it from its native place. You strip it from the African roots, you strip it from the Jewish people, you strip it from where it is, you give them new names, you move them in, you take it over as your thing, you colonialize it in the terms that we would use today, you give them all lovely white names and you ship it off to other people, and then you strip them of their names and apply your Christian names to them, and then you propagate these anti-Jewish ideas which turn into anti-Semitic ideas, which seem to have come full circle into Zionist ideas where we're returning people and there is a holy land and yada 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 yada, etc., from that ideology. But there is also this other ideology, I guess, that we must return to the Jewish faith. Like there is a return to, we should reconnect ourselves in some way to it. Like Christians shouldn't be a separate, and you should in some ways pick yourself up and reattach yourself to that which has been severed, so to speak.
Listen, I'm fully for Christianity taking a step closer towards Judaism in many ways. I think Judaism has a lot to offer Christianity, but because of the anti-Jewishness that I mentioned, it's lost, it's discarded. Let's be honest, you see a lot of these Jews when they celebrate their holidays, they have a good party.
Listen, man. Okay, so there's a little unknown facts about me. I used to be a teacher. I used to work for many different schools, but one school I worked for was a Jewish school, and one of the things I loved the most was the holiday time. Oh my goodness. I was like, it makes you fall in love with your faith. So if you ever get the chance, I really do advocate for this. If you ever get the chance to practice Judaism in a real way, like actually follow along with what they're doing, the holiday times. If you get somebody who's sympathetic to Christianity and can help you, guide you, or you can, there are Messianic Jews that you can follow with. It really gives you a renewed perspective on your faith, because one of the things I didn't realize, these people like to party. Christianity is so devoid sometimes, I feel, of joy and celebration. And where is the high days? Where is the let's celebrate things? We got so much like keeping it down, like it feels so restrictive sometimes, that I really, it was liberating to my Christian experience, totally liberating. It really, I think it set me on a course to be where I am today, pastoring, etc., because it was such a profound experience to be at the holidays. I mean, when you do, I think it's Purim, when we do the story of Esther, I have never heard anything like that. You get a full school, gymnasium of kids doing the story of Esther, and every time Esther's name is mentioned, there's cheering, and every time they say Haman, it's boo, and you get, I mean, it's just such an energy, such a complete, I mean, it's just so invigorating to celebrate in that way. So for me, it was just, totally liberating.
Yeah. So as I said, for me, as I said, I think Judaism has a lot to offer in giving a more holistic picture of whom God is. And at the same time, I think that Christianity has a lot to offer to Judaism.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a one-way exchange of ideas. I think that both have a lot to offer to each other in furthering the concept of God. And as I said, I mean, we've worshipped with Messianic Jews, and I had a great time there.
Yeah, good fun. Good fun. Loved it.
Had a great time.
Okay, so we've covered two major things, and I see that we've done our hour, but I really kind of, I want to get to one more area if I can. And I had an idea of which area it was, and it was gone now.
Is it purity, culture, and sexism?
There you go. That's the one. That's the one. So because we were talking about Purim, I think it was, went straight to purity culture. No, it was the fact that Christianity can feel so restrictive. So another thing that I think Christians are unfortunately known for is that if you are a serious Christian, so now we move away from the kind of evangelicals, which I think a lot of people recognize is loosely Christian. We say that in the nicest possible sense we can say. People do recognize, I think, people who take religions and faith seriously recognize that there is clearly some structural dysfunction going on with the structure of Christianity, but that when you look at a Christian, like a person who follows Christ, who follows the way, shall we put it like that, that anyone who takes it seriously, then you run into this problem, this wall of girls bad, sex bad, boys great. Like, you just run into this wall head on, that if you are serious about Christianity, as a man or a woman, that somehow that has equated to girls are bad, anything you can to blame a woman is probably her fault, and boys are the power holders and are the ones that can do everything. Did I say that as fairly as I could without sounding too judgmental?
Yeah. And you see, it's funny for me because I think in ignoring the Old Testament, and the legalism that accompanies the Old Testament is part of what gives, and not understanding the shortcomings of legalism is part of what gives rise to purity culture, or what gave rise to purity culture. You must do this, you must do that, you must do this, you must do that. And so you're focused on acts. It's like salvation through works, except that it's more insidious, because for me it also has a lot to do with misogyny and control and power over women. That's the thing. But it's yeah, it's more concerned with the outward workings and actions rather than a true conversion experience.
Yeah.
And in her book, Real Sex, Lauren Winner, she writes that chastity is not simply the absence of sex, but it's the active conforming of one's body to the arc of the gospel.
Ooh. Okay, say that one more time. Say it one more time because I like it. Say it.
That chastity is not the absence of sex, but the active conforming of the body to the arc of the gospel.
Oh. Oh. Now. Oh, now. It's a summer right there. So I want to take a quick step back because I just want to make sure that everyone who watches this understands what we mean when we say purity culture. So purity culture, I guess, is a term that was really coined a decade or two ago, but it describes the period of 100 or so years, particularly where women were heavily policed, especially in the 80s and 90s, where you got a lot of books that came out that said, I kissed dating goodbye, those famous books. You had like purity rings, you got engaged to your own daughter and odd behavior like this, to ensure that a woman stayed pure until her wedding day, at which case she was completely defiled, or in my husband's words, she turned into property of your husband. Okay, so I'll just take a pause there in that moment because that's really just, it hurts to say those kinds of things. And that idea that a woman's worth and value was tied to her vagina. So as long as nothing happened in her vagina, she was pure and holy and she was worth something as long as she managed to keep that up. And if she let that go, then she was a rose crumpled and she had no value. She was a broken pot that you can never put back together. The analogies are endless of things that we women were. If anything should happen to us in any way sexual, my goodness, you were damaged beyond all but repair, and no man would ever love you, and no man should love you in that way because God forbid. But by the way, men were allowed to be promiscuous. I don't understand how that works. Issues. And that went hand in hand with, of course, women knowing their place and being homemakers and not speaking back, not teaching men. I mean, it goes step by step through. Like, it affects. I would not be able to teach a class over a man because I'm a woman and my place is over here, and I'm only allowed to do things if my husband gave permission. Okay, I can't talk much more about this without feeling like I'm going to be sick. So take over at any point. Help me out here. Move us on.
To what?
To anything other than purity culture. Right. I mean, seriously.
Well, I just want to say that purity culture is toxic. And it's a toxic part of some branches of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And it's not just toxic to women, it's toxic to men as well.
Oh, yes.
So, yes, as I said, for me, it just needs to be done away with. It doesn't take into account the idea of grace.
Nope.
And salvation. And as you said, it places too much worth on the sexuality, or it places too much value on the sexuality of a person, when actually we are a lot more than our sexuality. Yes. And this is just a thought. I don't know if there's any research done on it, but I would question, by placing so much value on the sexuality of a person, is purity culture just as damaging to the human psyche as pornography?
Well, it would be interesting to see. I was going to jump in and say yes, worse, immediately. But it would be interesting to see what was out there. I mean, this isn't what we intended to fully delve into, and of course we can always talk about the dark side of purity culture in another episode. But I think it's worth noting that you get these ideas of power and retaining power. And this is another form of that. Of course, this is now the masculine power. This is how you are a man. This is how you achieve your dominance. This is how you stay in power. Women don't vote. Women don't do this. They don't own land. All of those ideas, women are too precious. They get put on the pedestal. And a lot of that comes from European, the colonial kind of mindset and all of those things. But then it gets enshrined into the Christian faith and it gets ramped up, particularly over the decades. It's like it just keeps getting ramped up to the point that any deviation, any sort of mentioning of anything outside of what would be seen as pure, and that's it. You're an outlier of Christian. You're not even counted anymore. I
was going to say, for me, I see the similarities in the fact that both the purity culture and pornography objectify women.
Yeah.
Right. So you have the objectification of women, but you also have the fact that the value of the woman in pornography and purity culture is her sexuality.
Yeah. Certainly not anything else.
And a woman has within pornography, she serves no other purpose other than sexual, and within purity culture, she serves no other purpose and has no other real value than a sexual one. And so that's, for me, I just see correlations between the two. And as I said, it's just a question that I have. I don't know of any studies or anything that have been conducted into that.
Well, I know that there's been some research done in terms of the damage done to women during the purity culture movement, in terms of people who've had to apologize maybe for their books that they wrote, and then went on journeys to do research and find out, well, what are the results? What has happened as a result of the book that I wrote? What has happened as a result of this movement? And then some ugly truths are told of, the damage, the wake of broken women and men in its thing, women particularly. I like the fact that you pointed out there that it dehumanizes men, because I think actually there's a myth in some ways that if you have purity culture, it gave men, it serves men's purposes, and the only purpose it serves is to dehumanize you and give you the idea that men have no self-control, no ability to think outside of their willy. That's it. That's the only thing that you think with, that you actually have less brain function than I would. In some ways it almost makes it seem like women have higher brain functions because we should conserve and work hard and do all of these things to conceal ourselves, because poor man, he only thinks with his willy, and therefore that's just what's going to attack you at any given moment.
Well, for me, as I said, you're absolutely right in what you're saying, but I will go a step further and say that actually the whole purity culture highlights the inconsistencies of Christianity and misogyny. And sexism. Because we're always being told women are emotional.
Now, come on now.
A man cannot control himself around a beautiful woman.
Any woman. Anything that moves.
Well, yes. So there's a real dishonesty in attempting to hold both of those positions at the same time.
Yes.
You cannot fault women and say they're too emotional, and then say, well, you know what? They're calm-headed enough to be controlled and rational enough for us men who cannot control ourselves.
Yeah, and also then you get these kind of other sides where women are conniving and women are going to get you and all of this kind of thing. So I thought they were docile and unable to do anything, but now they're conniving. And now they're, gold diggers and man traps and blah, 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 blah. The list is endless of all the bad words that we get called when we're not conforming to the societal norm of keeping our legs closed. Like somehow magically, if our legs open, suddenly our brains switch on, like there's a connection. And that men somehow don't have that connection. Suddenly, if they're using that part of their body, they have apparently no ability to control any part of their brain whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like all ethics, choices, morals, anything that any value you held dear, like fidelity or, not raping somebody or anything like that, suddenly went out the window because you saw a woman. You just looked on her. I mean, sorry.
And I think what we're now touching on is another dark side to Christianity, which is that there is a real lack of accountability amongst it.
Which brings us full circle in our conversation. We're back at the beginning.
Yeah, it does. But you have these ideas that float around. The devil made me do it. The devil tempted me. All of this. Or if something happens, it's God's will. And we ignore our role in the situation.
I prayed to find out what God wanted me to do. So he said, this is what I should do. And now that it's all going wrong, it must be God's fault because it ain't mine. I mean, I prayed, right?
So, and that's on the personal level. But then you have...
Let alone the corporate level.
Well, we spoke about this in the beginning, that actually it was pleasant surprise. Yeah. It was pleasantly surprising that a Christian institution took responsibility for its actions when for centuries people were fighting to get an apology from the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church for their role in the transatlantic slave trades. You've got the Salem witch trials, which, people need to take accountability for. On a corporate level, churches are slow to acknowledge wrongdoing, and they're even slower to repent.
Which is so weird because, a basic sermon I would preach on any given Saturday, Sunday morning would be about which subject? Repentance. Like, what? Well, it beggars belief, doesn't it, really?
It does. It does, because you have so many, pastors, especially within evangelical wings, talking about repentance and hellfire and this and that. And on a corporate level, you can't get it together.
No.
There's some real hypocrisy going on here.
Yeah. And I think there is a note to say that we've talked about the kind of historical power structures that have led us to where we are. And of course, we know that in the last few hundred years, we've had such a divergence in Christianity. Like, this didn't exist back then. We're talking about these denominations and evangelicals and Methodists and Baptists and all of these Adventists and the full list of ists, so to speak. But you didn't have that range. You had the Christian church, and the Christian church was the state church, which was a Roman church.
Well, you had a few offshoots like the Mennonites and then all
also
of these.
I say that, I quickly say that, and then I'm quickly taking it back because of course you did have the whole branch of the Turkish way that went up that way. I have a piece of it.
Then you've got the Coptic in
there
Ethiopia,
you go.
And all of these things. Yeah. So there are branches, but the prevailing. Then you've got the Russian Orthodox and all that. But you've got
Orthodox Church,
the prevailing image of Christianity. It's either the Roman Catholic Church or the
Protestant Church now.
Fundamentalist evangelicals from out of the States. And just on that note, I want to say that I actually disagree with the dictionary definition of fundamentalists.
Oh, this is interesting. So we've got in okay, let's go. What's this? What happened now?
Well, the dictionary's definition of a fundamentalist is someone who takes a literal interpretation of the text.
Okay, right. Which would be a fundamentalist, except we don't have those. We have extremists.
Well, you see, no, I even they call them fundamentalist extremists. You can't separate. You can't separate one from the other.
Extremists.
Right? For me, I see it as, or the fundamentalism as being, or fundamentalists as, or who are portrayed and stand up and identify as fundamentalists typically these days, are people that focus on one or two teachings, one or two tenets at the expense of all others.
Yes.
And this isn't just within Christianity, this is also in Islam, this is within Judaism, this is within whatever religion or system of faith or belief that you have. You have
or political ideology.
Or political ideology. You have
yeah.
one or two tenets that you hold on to at the expense of all others. So since we're talking about Christianity, because I could talk about Islam, but we're talking about Christianity, I'm going to keep it on Christianity. You have this unhealthy focus on abortion. And we were just talking about, sexual, the purity culture and all this. You have this unhealthy focus on sexuality, particularly as it pertains to women, and abortion, control of women's bodies. It's all about power and control. But you focus unhealthily on these things and ignore the texts that say, well, actually, you need to care for the widow. You need to care for the stranger within your lands. You need to do all of these things. And that is what allows people to identify as Christians, go on a rampage about abortions,
and do really destructive things. Yeah, and do really destructive things. I mean, you focused on abortion and you're blowing up people in abortion clinics. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You can't, the irony, the hypocrisy, the level of cognitive dissonance you have to do to put those two things in the same sentence is utterly ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous, but you can have that because, as you say, you focus on one or two things. I would agree with you in that, I'm sure that I guess it's the colloquial way that we use fundamentalist. We apply it to people who have these extremist beliefs, and I've taken to just labeling them extremist and not fundamentalist or anything else. I'm obviously not very polite, but I do that deliberately because I think it's unfair to people who are fundamental to actually do that. If you have this idea that you should take a literal approach to the Bible, I disagree with you, or a literal approach to your whatever belief it is, I disagree with you. But if you want to do that, that's one thing. And you do that consistently, that's your business. I'm going to disagree with you. We're going to have arguments and discussions about theology. We're going to have some challenges because I don't think you can take a literal approach to the entire Hebrew Bible, to the entire Bible of scripture wealth that we have. If you take a literal approach to it, you will end up in a hot mess because there are some real difficulties there.
Because you can't.
Because you can't, right? You had to have interpretation.
And
you need some wisdom.
As such, you cannot be a fundamentalist.
Right.
Because you would have to place the emphasis on certain texts over another.
Something has to win. So what they've done, and I guess this is something that I guess Christianity has constantly done, and the goalpost has moved, which is you've seen that over the especially for people's recent memories, if you're of a certain generation and you went to church, you probably grew up in a church, if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you've grown up in a church where sexual ethic, I'll put it that way because I'm put it nicely, but purity is an issue. Women should be pure. That was your thing. Fast forward to, your 30s, 40s, 50s, you would have heard a lot of abortion. But you go to the younger generation and what they're hearing a lot of is homosexuality. The ethic, the sexual behavior is just shifting constantly from one, we're just fighting one battlefield after another on this issue, instead of dealing with the text in a true and kind and meaningful fashion that would actually solicit a loving response on any of these subjects. They are just brutally treated to what is a very misogynistic, very it's disingenuous, isn't it? It's just not a real version of the Bible. It's just rubbish. That's really terrible.
And that's why, for me, as I said, I would like to see a return to an earlier version of Christianity. not in regards to, Christianity as it was when it became empire. I think pre-empire, because as I said, for me, one of the fundamental tenets of Christianity is the ability of people to choose for themselves.
Yeah.
And in that, I reserve the right to tell you, I disagree with your choice.
Right.
But come, sit down, let's have a meal together.
Yeah. You're still my brother, you're still my sister. Like, I'm not going to disown you for that. we may have some disagreements, but we're not disowning each other for that. Yeah.
And I think, that one of the issues that I see in Christianity today is the desire to strip that freedom away from people. And for me, that is tantamount to erasing the image of God from someone.
Right. Because we are, after all, made in his image. Indeed. Well, I think that we've done as much as we can do in 1.5 hours. There's a big topic, the dark side of Christianity. It certainly will have people talking, I think, and we would love our viewers to give us feedback and to ask questions. If there are parts of this topic you would like to see come up again in fullness, because of course this is introductory level, the dark side of Christianity, where we touched on 4 different areas. So we would love your feedback. We would love your questions. Please just put them in the comment section or send us a message. But put them in the comment section if you can, if you're willing to, because that helps us see them. If you private message us and you're not on our friend network, of course, then we might not see your message. So that's just a reminder about that. But I think we've come full circle as 2 Christians discussing the dark side of Christianity. It's not an easy subject. We're still Christians at the end of it, right?
I'm a keeper of the way.
He's a keeper of the way. He's a keeper of the way. I'm still a serving pastor, so I'm still a Christian. I love the keeper of the way moniker. I think I might have to adopt it soon. But for now, we continue on our journey. And we hope that you've at least seen that as Christians, as people, the keepers of the way, we wrestle with these issues ourselves. We don't just accept that the status quo of what we see around us is the right thing, but that we're actively seeking to educate ourselves, that we're actively seeking to stand against injustice, that we're actively seeking to educate others about our faith, even our own people about our faith, and to hope that it makes a difference in the lives of those around us, that it can be transformative. Because I think if you've encountered the dark side of Christianity, if you've had the unfortunate the misfortune to encounter the dark side of Christianity, it hurts. And I think I would like you to know that there are those of us who are working to make sure that that ends, that we're not the cause of so much pain, that we do return to being like Christ and being light bearers in the world and being keepers of the way, as opposed to destructive forces of darkness. Which is not a nice way of describing a Christian, I think, but you know what I mean. If you watch this episode, you know what I mean. Like, you know what I'm trying to say. Any last words from you, the coming storm?
I got lots of words.
But
I see the time.
All right, on that note then, as we're respectful of your time, we went over by half an hour, but I think you'll agree with us, it was worth it. Please comment, please share with your friends, please continue to support. We're here next Sunday to discuss the dark side, to have a topical discussion on religion, politics, social justice, and all other things that tickle our fancy, including Happy Love Day, everyone. It's the last few moments. I hope you enjoy it. It's the Love Day, people. Look at his face. He's so unhappy. Right. So you're going to say goodbye to the people?
Laters.
Peace.